20 minutes.
Yeah, but this has got the starting soon thing. Oh, I should have music playing.
Next time, one thing at a time.
Oh, okay. It's probably catching this audio anyways. I should have music playing.
Next time. Yes, it is. Change your scene for the preview. There you go.
Hello everybody, it's Sue from slowideas.com. I'm back! I am continuing with the project that I started last night, which is a simple sleeveless tunic project for the summer. This is something nice and easy, and it allows me to demonstrate a variety of techniques that I use when I'm sewing garments. So if you have a sewing machine languishing in your closet and you are telling yourself, I don't know how to use it, or I've never had the time, well, now you have the time. And you have me to help you use it. So we're going to be walking through this project a bit at a time, and I'm keeping myself very busy in between segments so I don't race ahead of you. This will probably take us 5 or 6 segments to get through, and then you can follow along later on and sew your own. You probably won't be able to get the same pattern that I'm using, but you will be able to order another simple top pattern off of the internet, or you can contact Gala Fabrics or Make House or Cloth Castle here in Victoria. They are all open behind their closed doors, and you can talk to them about what you're trying to do, and they will set you up, and you can go and pick it up curbside with no contact. So there's no excuse for not sewing anymore. Now's the time to do it. When we were last together, I was showing you how I make pattern adjustments for the front of a garment because I have larger than a B cup. And so if you have larger than a B cup or smaller than a B cup, you can make adjustments to the front of your pattern so that it won't be either ridiculously tight across the chest or way too big, and the neckline will fit nicely, and yada yada yada. So we created space in there, and I made a couple of adjustments that I'm going to have to transfer to the back, and I'm going to make a few other adjustments to the back of the pattern for things that I know I usually have to do to fit my body. Now, if this is your first time sewing a project, you won't know what adjustments you have to do, but I will tell you why I'm doing these adjustments, and if you have similar figure features, let's say, then you will know to follow these along. And if you don't have the same figure features, well, then you don't have to worry about it. There are lots of good tutorials online for different pattern adjustments to fit every body, like literally every body. All you have to do is say, you know, I have knock knees, or I have crooked back, or crooked hips, or one hip higher than the other, and the internet will provide you with the pattern adjustments that you need to make. Okay, so last we were here, I adjusted this. I'm going to work on my dress form because it's way easier than trying to show you things on me. But you can just do things on you if you have a patient partner or friend in the house who you trust to not stick you with pins, but to pin in the right places. So what I have here is my dress form, Madeline, and I've pinned the front and the back together. Now, if I didn't have a dress form, I could pin them together and, oops, I stuck it to the back here in one place. So if I didn't have a dress form, I could pin them together just like this, and then I could try it on like this. Let's just move that up so you can see a little bit more. I would put it on. Yeah, tissue paper is a little bit, you know, delicate, but I'm being gentle with it and trying to see how things fit. So I have pinned in a couple of changes. One of them is to the shoulder here. Now I have what's called in sewing parlance, I have a forward shoulder. It comes from spending too much time. Well, I would like to say rowing, but the truth is it's just probably too much time at a computer. And my shoulder joints are somewhat rotated forward, or let's just say I was born with it. And so what that usually means is that there's lots of extra fabric on the front of my shirts, and then the back kind of has to pull to line up. So if we look at the shirt that I am wearing, the shoulder seam is way back there. And I want it to be sitting on the top of my shoulder. So I want it forward about an inch. So that is called a forward shoulder adjustment. And the way that you do it is you just simply move the pieces of your garment. So instead of pinning them together along the size lines, which I've marked the front here in purple, I would actually make it so that the front is going to get shorter. So I'm going to move it so that I'm pinning down here. Do the same line on the back, or I might even give it more room on the back. And that just kind of rotates where that seam sits. And then I will have my forward shoulder adjustment, but I'm not going to adjust it all the way up to the neck because my neck is in the same place. So I'll just leave it there and pin it in. And you know what? This is one of those trial and error things. You put it together, you sew it up, and you try it on and see if you like it. If not, you unstitch it and put it back together again another way. As ye sow, so shall ye rip. So I'm going to try this on again and see if I like where it's sitting. Not quite yet. I might adjust that a little bit more. It's still sitting kind of back. So I'll put it on Madeline here so I can see better what I'm doing. We're going to have the waistline on the garment is marked for me. So I'm going to put that on where I know my waistline is. If you're doing this at home, you can tie a long piece of elastic around your waist. Like if you are using, if you're sewing fabric masks, for example, and you've bought a bunch of elastic, tie that around your waist. It will sit at your natural waistline, which is also the part that stays the same when you move back and forth. That's your natural waistline. It's not down there where you wear your pants. It's up here. So that's the waistline of my garment. And as you can see, there's a whole lot of extra fabric here. Lots of fabric there. Something's going on there. It could just be because it's a loose style of shirt, but I might want to do something about that. So the front neck sits here. There's a seam in my dress form, and I'm just going to wiggle around. I'll put the waist band for the top or front on the waist. And yes, indeed, this has lots of extra fabric in it here. Rather than take that out, I'm going to guess that it is kind of on purpose. So I'm going to just let it drop a little bit. It's a slouchy kind of shirt, and I don't want to make it super tight fitting because that's not how it's meant to be. The center will be on the center of my body, about a ½ an inch down from my natural waist. So I'm going to pin that in place, and that actually makes the front and the back sit kind of okay. There's a little bit of extra fabric there, but that's all right. So my front seam, when that's in fabric, it'll sit nice, but I can just change the outside of the shoulder somewhat, just so that it sits right over the shoulder seam of my dress form. And you would be able to tell, because if you were wearing a t-shirt or something like that when you tried this on, you can sort of tell where the shoulder seam is, but you can also really feel the high part of your shoulder on your own body. A lot of sewing and pattern adjustments is getting to know your own body and how to make clothing fit it. The patterns are not always right. In fact, they're very seldom right. So that gives us a bit of a tight armhole back here. The paper has ripped slightly. So I'm going to just grab some tape and put that on there to reinforce it so it doesn't rip anymore. But that's kind of to be expected around a back armhole because it does curve around that part of the body. So I'll just reinforce it and see how it sits. So I like the amount of fabric that I have around my body. There's quite a bit of extra looseness here. The design is supposed to be 5 inches larger than your body. And as you can see, the top that I'm wearing, like there's a good, I can pinch out a good 2 inches on either side of my body. And with this top, I can actually tell that the bust is a little small for me because I've got these wrinkle lines going from the sides to the part where it needs more fabric. This top was probably also designed and sewn for someone with a B cup or possibly a C cup, and I'm just a little bit larger than that. But I can't change ready-to-wear clothes, but I can darn well change the clothes that I have made. Okay, so what other adjustments do I make to my back? So I do have all this extra fabric here, and I think that's just a little too much. So what I want to do is I'm going to bring the neckline down to where I want it to be. And something I know about my body is that I have this really flat upper back. A lot of people, their spines curve like that. Not that exaggerated, but like that. And my doctor has noted that I have a very straight upper back. There's very little curvature in it. And so I typically alter my patterns to take in some of that. And what I do is I'll just pinch out a tiny little pinch, a fold here on the back at the center. And that's like maybe 1/4 of an inch overlap, so maybe a ½ inch in total in the adjustment. And I sort of let it go out to nothing somewhere around the middle of the back. Because I actually do have fairly well-developed shoulder muscles. It's just that my back is flat. So I don't want to take any extra fabric out of there or out of the armhole. I just want to take it out of here. This will get interesting when I go to lay this on a piece of fabric, because what I'm doing is creating a 3-dimensional paper duplicate of my body. And of course, fabric being, this is a 3-dimension, fabric being a 2-dimensional thing, I'm going to have to figure out how to translate this. So the waist, I'm pretty happy with how sort of loose and flowy this is going to be. It's going to be a nice, easy to wear summer top. Yeah, I think that's, oh, the other thing I will need to do before I'm done here is I will need to lengthen this side seam. You can't tell from the way the camera is, but you can see it there. The pattern piece for the back is now 1 inch longer than the pattern piece for the front, or backwards, because I did this full bust adjustment and added length here to the top, and I'm gonna have to even that up, otherwise sewing will be a pain in the butt. Okay, so those are the two main pattern pieces for this garment. There's a few other sort of accompanying pattern pieces that will go with it that I need to alter as well, otherwise when I try to put things together it won't work and I will be frustrated. So I often forget to alter these other pieces. So the pieces that will go with the front and back that I need to adjust are the front and back armhole facings. Facings are things that go into a garment to provide a little extra strength around the edge. This garment has a front facing and a front and back armhole facings, which are curved like that because they are made to go around like that. And I would line up the notches and pin those in place along the stitching line just to see how they line up. And spoiler, they're not gonna, because I've changed these pattern pieces. So that'll be a pain in the butt, because if I forgot about those changes that I made, I would be trying to sew them together and they wouldn't fit. So as we know, I changed where the seam line is up here. I changed the angle of the front when I did my full bust adjustment because I hinged the armhole. I cut to here and I sort of squished the armhole a little bit. So that angle isn't going to match the front armhole facing. So I have a couple of choices here. I could lay this flat and redraw the armhole facing to just basically match that same curve, or I'm going to think about whether I really want armhole facings in this garment anyways. This is where I start to go off the pattern instructions and make some of those customizations to make me a more happy camper. Now, if there's one thing that I really hate in wearing garments is when there's a facing and it flips out at the armhole and you've got this flappy little bit like sticking out from your armhole, and every time you put the garment on you have to like tuck it back in, and it's just like, such a pain in the butt. Now, we use armholes to strengthen and reinforce the fabric at that edges, but it's actually kind of a home sewing thing to do, and your ready-to-wear clothes rarely will have armhole facings because they don't wear well, they don't sell well. Instead, what they'll have is just a piece of binding tape, siren going by, on the to reinforce that size of that armhole. So this is just one layer of fabric and the seam allowances are bound up in that tape. And I'm going to do that. So that means I do not need to mess around with my front and back armhole facings. Huzzah! I'll just put those away. Okay, the next thing is the front facing and the back facing. I haven't made any significant changes to the neckline, either on the front or the back. My changes have been lower down on the body, and so these will still match the style lines on my garment. And so I could just leave them as is. Then I ask myself, do I need front and back facings? Because as with a back facing or as with an armhole facing, these are going to sit, they're going to be sewn into my garment, they're going to be flipped inside like that to provide reinforcement for the garment. And then because they're not tacked down or anchored to anything, every time I put this shirt on, it's going to pull it out. Me no likey. Now, getting rid of front facings, I have to be fairly confident that whatever I reinforce the front with is going to let the fabric be strong enough to hold its shape, so it won't pull out of shape or become loose and saggy after I've worn it or after I've washed it and worn it a few times. So I am going to choose my own adventure and do away with the facings on this garment. So this is one of those things that if you're taking traditional home ec sewing classes, they will be like, no, you must follow the instructions. And let me tell you, I got a C- in home ec in grade 11, and I hated sewing until I got out of formal sewing education and just started messing around with things on my own. Oh, and tonight I want to show off, I am wearing one of the very first garments I ever made. They are a pair of gray drawstring polar fleece pants. I honestly cannot believe these things have not fallen apart. I made these in 1990, I'm going to say either 1995 before my final exams in my first year. It might have been late 96. But either way, these are really, I tell you, when I first made them as an 18 or 19-year-old, they fit a lot looser than they do now. But this fabric has just stayed. So when you start sewing for yourself and you start making decisions about what you want in a garment, it is so much more fun than when you were in school doing home ec. So yeah. All right, I'm going to do away with the facings, and I'll have to think of my reinforcement tools later on as I'm going through the construction. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the fabric type that I'm using. Now, in last broadcast, I showed you this beautiful, beautiful fabric, and I was all excited about using it for this top, and then I was telling my friend Julie about it and showing it to her, and I sort of pulled it up and I realized, first of all, it's kind of see-through. That's not so much of a problem. I can wear a tank top underneath, but this is really flowy fabric. And I started thinking about this pattern. Now, the pattern picture shows it is loose, but it is not flowy. It has body to it. It does not sort of fold in drapes around her body, and when designers put together a sketch like this and a photo like this, they're designing a garment for particular types of fabric, and you can't fight that. You can't often take a completely different weight of fabric and use it in a pattern that's meant for something else and end up with good results. I will tell you, that is one of the surefire ways of being disappointed with your garment. So I read this again, and on the back of every commercial pattern, they will tell you what fabrics it goes with. Laundered cottons, batiks, broadcloth, lightweight denim, lightweight PK, I don't know, lightweight poplin, lightweight twill, sateen, crepe, crepe-back satin, laundered silks and rayons, gauze, double georgette, soft lightweight linen, and linen blends. What these all have in common is a certain amount of weight and body. So they don't flop all over the place. Now, in normal times, I would be like, oh no, I have to go fabric shopping. Whatever will I do? I'd get in my car and go to the fabric store, stat. Unless it was like 9 o'clock at night, and then I'd be out of luck until the next morning. However, not happening right now, so I had to go to my stash and try to think of what fabrics I had that I could use. So I'm going to assemble my tabletop view here. There we go. Now you can see my tabletop where I have assembled a bunch of my fabric from my stash. Here's the thing that I had that is not going to work out, so bye-bye. I have this printed linen, which I got from a fabric swap. And so it did say linen. So this is an option. I gotta love free fabric. Fabric acquired in swaps is never really free because I take a bunch of the fabric that I've paid for to the swap. So somewhere along the line, money has been spent. But I can just kind of ignore that and pick up new free to me fabric. So this is linen. I can tell because of how it feels. And it's got a bit of body. It's a little scratchy. If I wanted to prove to myself that it was 100% linen, I could take a little bit and burn it, but we're not doing pyrotechnics on today's show. So that's one option. This is a kind of a first time I've made this pattern, so you know, I could do this. This isn't really a print that I wanted to wear like on the top. I was actually thinking of making a pair of shorts out of it. However, it doesn't have a huge amount of body, so and it's no stretch at all. So maybe it wouldn't make such great shorts. So it's a maybe. And the next thing I have is this, which I got at Value Village for $8. Sweet. This is raw silk woven. It has, it might have a little bit of linen in it, or cotton perhaps. It's been in my stash for so long that I almost destashed it. Like it was in the bag of stuff I was going to get rid of. And then I saw Bonnie Henry's Fluvog shoe design and realized, oh, I have fabrics in my destashing bag that would make a really awesome dress. I'm going to claim those back. So thankfully there wasn't anywhere to take my donatables because this would have been gone. And I have, I'm not sure exactly how much I have of this. Haven't unfolded it in a while, but I have a lot, and I probably have enough to do the Bonnie Henry dress as well as this top if I wanted to. So those are both linens, and they both match what's on the pattern. Here is a third choice. This is actually a stretch fabric. It was also from a fabric swap, and it's a light ponte knit. So that's a very stable knit. It actually will act like a woven, even though it has a little bit of stretch. And it has this kind of nifty border print thing going on, where it's got these bigger dots, and every now and then on the fabric, it goes and it switches. Oh, actually, that's along selvage. So that's how the fabric looks. So it's widthwise. So I would need to cut it out on a different direction. So I will need to basically like throw out the pattern instructions for layout and just make it up myself. So I was going to run a poll and see which one I should use, but no one's actually watching this right now, so I'm just going to decide. This seems like a good idea. However, I don't want to complicate this broadcast by doing something so completely off book. So I'll put that aside and I might use it later. This is really, really beautiful, and I'm not sure I really want a top that's this Pepto-Bismol pink, like right up close to my body. I might change my mind later, but so I'm going to go with this fabric, and it's handy because I'll just keep the black thread on my sewing machine and I won't have to change again. Alrighty, so the last thing I'm going to do on this particular segment is I'm going to lay out my pattern pieces and show you how to do that to get ready for cutting out your pattern. And then I'll probably cut it out off the air, but I'll be back tomorrow probably and explore the wonderful world of interfacing and then start piecing together the garment. Okay, so as you can see in my tabletop cam, which is actually my iPhone, I have laid it out. My sewing table gives me room to lay out about 1 meter, 1.75 fabric once I get everything off of it. And I'm lining it up. This is pre-washed. I can tell because someone has serged the edges of this. But if I just bought this from the fabric store and brought it home, I would take it to my washing machine and I would pre-wash this exactly how I plan to wash my clothes once they're made. You know, there's probably something out there that says you shouldn't wash linen in your regular wash. You should dry clean it. Guess how many things I dry clean? None. That's right. I don't dry clean things. I'm going to wash it, and if that screws up the garment, well, I'll just have to make another top. Oh no. This is the great thing about using free or cheap fabric. You can't get too upset if you mess it up with washing. So I need to cut out 2 things that are on the fold. How do I know? Because it says on both pieces, cut on fold. I'm just taking it off the dress form here. I need to make, I'm just gonna mark that seam line where I want it to be sewn with a Crayola marker. That didn't make any sense at all. Okay. Oops. Something's stuck here. Oops. Okay, so here's my front piece. And now it says center fold. And my back piece also says center fold. Oh, you know what? We have to do a few more adjustments here because we haven't done this center back thing where I took the extra fabric out. So let's just change this so you can, oh no, you can actually see what I'm doing fairly well from the tabletop cam. I'm going to try and make that lie flat. And where'd my tape go? There we go. Tape that down. And I have to lengthen this, don't I? Yes, yes I do. So I'm going to chop at these double lines across your pattern. That is where the designers know that if you need to make an adjustment to it, that's where you can cut. Now on my front, I actually cut below that, and I've sort of forgotten that, and I've cut here, but the back curve shouldn't make too much of a difference. If it does, it'll just be like a few millimeters out when I go to sew it, and that I can just cheat on. So I've got some of my extra pieces of tissue paper from cutting out my pattern, and to make sure that I can get this line absolutely straight, I know I'm adding 1 inch to my side seam because that is what was added in there. But yeah, that ended up being about the same. So I look at what I've taken out or added to my pattern. So that's 1 inch. So I'm going to mark on this pattern piece that I'm adding in. I'm going to mark 2 lines 1 inch apart from each other so that I have something really, really easy to align when I'm taping these back together. All right. So I'll put the bottom on first. And just try to get that edge really straight. Okay, and then what I have to do is I'm going to draw the continuation of this line up on that backing piece. So when I lay this over top, I'm going to line up that edge with where it would have been if I left it attached to its now sibling, Siamese twin. I've split the Siamese twins. And tape that in. Just like that. I've added an inch to the back. That's going to add length to the center back as well as to the side seam back. Do I want that? I can't see that being a huge problem. I'm tall. If I didn't want to add it at the center, I could simply kind of angle that down, but I think I'm just going to let that extra length be in there. It's a loose fitting shirt, and an extra inch of length covering my butt is never a bad thing. Now, one of the tricky things is having taken out this ½ inch here, I have made this line no longer straight. It no longer goes from bottom to top in a straight line, and since I'm supposed to put this along a fold, it is not going to go. This part veers off. See? It veers off. There. So I need to straighten that line. So I'm going to get a longer ruler. A meter stick would work. I have one over here in the corner for really long measuring jobs. And I'm going to line it up along the bottom. Now, I didn't really want to take out at a 1/4 of an inch across the back neck. So instead of just going straight up, I'm going to line it up with the known point here. I want to keep that measurement the same size, and I want to keep this measurement the same size. So I'm going to go from that dot, that corner up there, to this one down here. Fortunately, there's lots of extra paper down there. I don't usually fully cut out my pattern pieces until I've done all of the adjustments. Otherwise, I would have to add a piece of paper to draw this line on. So there we go. So I have shortened this bit, so when it goes across my straight back, it will be straight here. And I've straightened it out. Now, as I'm thinking about it, I realize that adding the length here above the waist might backfire on me somewhat. So I'm going to remove this from my piece here and redo it. Oops. I want to make sure that at the side seam I've got that inch, but I want to actually taper that into nothing, which really screws up my straight line here. Oh boy, does that screw that up. So I'm going to have to redraw that line again. Okay, that's got that added. Maybe I won't completely. I'll just have it be about a 1/4 inch apart because I don't really want that angle to be too out of whack. That will keep it from being too long across, down the center of my back. And I'm going to redraw my fold line so that it's a straight line from the top to the bottom. All right, I'll use a different color. I'll use green this time. So go from top to bottom. Ah, yes, now we see it is, I'm going to have to add some paper to that. Where do I have an extra piece of, here's an extra piece of tissue paper. Just need a narrow strip. Okay. And it has to go across this part here. I could tape it from the front to the back. I'm from the front is faster. Using ballpoint ink will actually make this line not like wipe off where my tape is. Okay, oh, I need more paper. I really made this line crooked when I was adjusting my pattern, but that's just sometimes what happens. You just gotta roll with it. If you're gonna cut something out on the fold, you want a straight line. All right, going from that dot to the bottom edge, I've got my ballpoint pen. Just keep that tissue flat. Okay, oh, it didn't exactly go straight. Darn it. All right, I know what I'm trying to do. Okay, so I now have my front and back pattern pieces. I will have my collar piece to cut, and I'm going to do away with my facings. So I'm only going to have to cut out 3 pieces on this, and then I'll have to figure out the facing issue. Yay. Right. So as you can see here, I have only 1 fold. I could possibly, now I see if I can fit both of these pieces across the width of this fabric. This is narrow fabric, linen often is, and so no, it overlaps. So what I'll have to do, I can either flip this one over and cut it out from way down there, or to be more thrifty with fabric, I'm going to lay this fabric out so that there are 2 folds and each side is folded in towards the center. Oh, oh, there is a flaw in this fabric. There's a hole there. Okay, you know what? I don't want to use that part of the fabric. Let's see what I've got up here. Are there any holes? Nope. Okay, this part's good. So I can see the fold line, and I'm just going to fold it in. I know that my pattern pieces are a little bit wider than half of this fabric, so I'll overlap the fold a little bit there. And then I will probably be able to lay out. I'm going to test the layout before I start cutting. Nothing sucks more than having cut out some of your pieces and realizing, oh, I don't have enough fabric to actually cut the rest of these pieces out. Oops. So that is on there. I'm going to be really stingy with how much fabric I use. Kind of get that fold back towards me. And I want to make sure that, because this is a woven fabric, I want to make sure that the straight weave, like there are, what is it? Weft and warp threads. And I'm having a brain fart, so I can't remember which one is which. But basically, you know, when you weave things, you end up with right angles, and I want to lay my fabric out so that the right angles are straight and not twisted. Because if they're twisted, the pieces of my garment aren't going to sit properly and fall straight down on my body. So I've got that there, and just because I'm just testing out this pattern layout, I'll throw a couple of pins in it to keep it in place, and then make sure I can fit the rest of the garment onto the fabric elsewhere. So I line up the fold line. Can you see this on there? Oh, I've gone past where the camera can see. There we go. Okay, so everything's straight. You can tell if something's on a straight grain because there aren't any like wavy bits in the fabric as it's lying down. And I'm just going to pin the corners. Okay. And then I will see what happens when I fold this other side towards. Pull it down a little bit on my table. I'm not going to cut it out like this, of course. I'm just trying to get to usable pieces of this fabric that doesn't have the hole in it that I was trying to avoid. If I was a smart cookie, I would have put a pin in it there, but I'm not. So this has to go along center fold. I need this to overlap quite a bit more to get that side in. So just let it flop over some more. Try and keep it from wrinkling too much. If it's lying flat, then I'm pretty sure it's on the straight grain. I'll just pull this down so I can use my table. Okay, so wow, this pattern just uses a lot of fabric because this is narrower fabric than I'm used to working with. And I'm just gonna have to basically go with moving it right above the other fabric. And hopefully I'll find that hole. Hopefully I'm not putting my pattern piece right over the hole. Here it is here. I'm gonna put a pin in there so I can feel it underneath. Maybe I'll put a couple of pins in there. Okay. Will I have enough fabric? That's the game. Okay. That will go to there. Where's that hole? Ah, the hole's right there. Yay, I'm going to avoid it perfectly. That's awesome. Okay. I have enough. And fortunately, since the only other thing I need to cut out of this fabric is my collar, I will be able to do that on some of the other pieces. And I'm just going to check and see like what the fabric requirements were for this. So if I'm making tunic B, reading this chart is interesting, and I think I'll do a video about this. And my fabric is 115 centimeters wide, which this was, possibly a little wider. I need 1.9 meters of the fabric. And I have it, fortunately. So this would be a bad time to find out that I didn't have enough of this particular type of fabric. Okay, so having figured out that I can lay out my pattern pieces on this fabric and it's big enough, I'm not gonna like lay it out and cut it out all tonight. What I will do is just show you a few tips and tricks about laying out or cutting out, and then join me tomorrow night as we start putting things together. Okay, other thing I just realized that I had not looked at with the back was whether it's gonna be wide enough across my bum. And I have junk in the trunk, and I don't like it when my shirts are too narrow across the back. Now this shirt, the style actually has a slit at the side, but even so, you don't want it like coming apart at the sides because you have too much junk in the trunk. You want there to be enough fabric across that width to make it look good. So I'm going to make one last minute pattern adjustment so that I get that extra width I want. And what I'm going to do is find my cutting scissors. I don't have any more pieces of paper, I don't think. What's this? That's a small piece. That won't be big enough. But I'll just show you to illustrate. So I'm going to get a pin. I'm going to get a ruler. And what I basically want is I want from about the waist of this shirt to the hem of it, I want it to be wider. So I'm going to draw a line that's parallel to my center and go to the hip. And this is a pattern adjustment that I've just kind of made up on my own, so it probably won't be any books. And I'm going to draw a line there up to where it meets the side seam. I don't want to shorten this hem, and if I were to just cut extra fabric out, that lengthens this side seam, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep this dimension here consistent because it has to match up with the front. So I will cut my pattern. I'm going to hinge it again like we did on the front bust adjustment to about there. Just reinforce that sucker, and I'm going to just give myself some more width, about an inch at the hem. So that'll create more of a curve here on the back piece, but what it won't do is change the length. So I'll just tuck some paper under there. It won't go all the way up, but it'll keep it stable. It'll keep that in place. All right, normally I would try to tape it all the way up to here, but I haven't got extra paper, I don't think. Oh, I can raid the recycling bin. There we go. Pop that under there. And tape it down. Okie dokie. So now that I've got my pattern pretty much the way I want it to be, I'm gonna pin down corners and curves. I pin on the inside of the garment, and I try to keep my pins about 1 centimeter away from my cutting line. If I get confused about which cutting line I'm following on this multi-size pattern, I can grab just a colored marker, any color, green, purple, what have you, and trace the size that I'm cutting out, just so I remember. There are some people who will do pattern alterations, like they'll make a garment narrower or wider by simply redrawing these lines on the side. However, you then have to match up the front because you're going to sew that, so the two pieces have to have the same shape. So I've pinned along the fold, and that will keep the pattern from shifting, and it'll keep my fabric from shifting around. And then I pin my corners, and then I pin about every 4 or 5 inches on long stretches. If I wanted to not use pins, an option is to cut out my pattern exactly on the cutting line, lay it down, and oh, I think my iPhone camera just conked out. Possibly it's running out of batteries. Oops. Oh, no, we're back. Good. Okay, so yeah. If I didn't want to use pins, I could trace the outline of my pattern using chalk onto the garment and then cut it out. What pins do is they do slightly distort the fabric, and the lighter fabric you have, the more that makes a difference. So it's something that if I was doing a couture garment, I would do that step. so that my edges, when I cut it out, are really crisp and clean and exactly the same size as the pattern. When I'm doing bra making, for example, I don't use pins, I trace and cut, but this is an easy garment, and the pins aren't going to make a huge amount of difference. Okay, here's my fabric scissors, and I'm just going to go around on my cutting line. There we go. I am right-handed, and the way that this table is set up, it kind of makes it awkward to cut down the middle of it, but I roll. I could actually pull this table away from the wall and go all the way around it. So if you cut out on your dining room table or like on your floor, I know a lot of people who do their sewing fabric layouts on their floor, you can just get up and move around. I'm trying to cut out exactly on the cutting line, and I'm trying to make it as smooth as I can. It gets tricky around curves, let me tell you. Now there's these notches in the fabric that you're supposed to, if you're, according to my high school home ec teacher, every time I get to one of those notches, I should stop, and I should never cut into my seam allowance. I should always do a little outward notch. Well, that is a pain in the butt, and I don't do that. I used to actually trim in, but there's a drawback to that, which is if you're working with fabric that frays a lot, you've basically created a weakness point in that seam allowance and a point of failure. So I don't do that anymore. I mark my notches with some chalk. If you don't have tailor's chalk available, something you might have is a Pilot friction ink pen. And these are the kinds that are removable by friction or by heat. Tricky thing is, if you've marked your garments with this and then you iron your marks, haha, your marks will disappear. So I tend to use tailor's chalk. They're cheap. It's something that you can get if you're picking up one of these patterns to do a project like this while you're on isolation. Just ask whoever you're buying it from to throw in some tailor's chalk. It comes in pink, white, yellow, I think, and blue. Use whatever is visible on your fabric. And so I will just open up my fabric edges while the pattern is still pinned in place. And I will just put a little mark in on the edge of the fabric wherever there's a notch. There are some places where there are little dots on the fabric. This says view A, C, D, and E. I'm making view B. I'm going to ignore that. On an armhole, that helps you match up where your sleeve sits so you can get your sleeve in properly. This garment has side slits, and that's what these dots down here are for, to mark. Now, it looks like they're marked about 5/8 of an inch, so 1 seam allowance away from your cutting line. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball where my cutting line is, throw a pin in, pull my fabric layers apart, and just sort of mark in a nice sized dot there. That won't come off. Okay, so I have cut out my back. I'm going to do the same thing with the front, and I will also be cutting out my collar while we're at it. This is a collar. I will lay it out on the fold. It says cut 2 on fold of fabric, so I'll have to cut duplicates and cut 1 on fold of interfacing. And so when we get together next time, tomorrow, we will talk about interfacing and what kind I'm going to use for this project. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get inspired to grab your sewing machine out of your closet and hook it up and think about what fabric you want to use, or go on to Cloth Castle or Gala or Make House's website or contact them and tell them that you want to do a beginner sewing pattern. They have really knowledgeable staff and they will set you up with everything that you need, including a new pair of scissors maybe. So support those local businesses. I'll be back tomorrow night, 7:30. Have a great night.